So why do you think it's gained such traction among certain segments of the population anyway, what we now call anti-racism?
It's pretty simple. It's influence, money, and power for them. The problem is with these anti-racist types, they will tell you that, okay, white people shouldn't be racist, but also you can't not be racist. You're always going to be racist if you're white. There's no world where you can no longer be racist.
You're flying Confederate flags. That may say something about your unconscious or semi-conscious feelings of racism. Like, do you think there's anything there?
No, I don't. It's difficult for a lot of people to understand how anyone could fly a Confederate flag unless they are just terribly racist. But those people do exist. I'm sorry, I met them.
I'm Ben Kawaller with the Free Press. I'm in Nashville at a cigar lounge called Bar Cigar Especial. I'm here to meet Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh is a crusading writer, podcaster, and documentary maker whose daily indictments of the American left on right-wing news platform The Daily Wire have earned him millions of followers.
Till a few months ago, this lesbian woman of color identified as a cisgender white man.
Alex is both a boy and a girl.
No, he's not.
Well, my background that qualifies me to speak to this is that I'm a human being with a brain.
Walsh first caught my attention in 2022 with his smash hit documentary, What is a Woman?, in which he demonstrated the shaky intellectual foundations of gender ideology.
What is a woman?
Great question. I'm not a woman, so I can't really answer that.
Now he's out with a new film, Am I Racist?, which sees him go undercover to often shocking effect in the so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, industry. He even landed a sit-down with the high priestess of DEI herself, Robin DiAngelo.
And what's your name?
I'm Matt.
Matt. Hi, Matt.
Nice to meet you.
For a bunch of reasons, Walsh is not someone I ever thought I'd be sharing a smoke with.
I just don't see how a gay marriage in any way damages a straight marriage.
Because we are making the institution meaningless.
But, as Matt would probably agree, I've had my share of strange bedfellows. I sat down with him in his home city of Nashville to talk man to man. Well, why don't we start by having these cigars here?
Yeah.
All right. Why don't you circumcise yours first?
It's one way of putting it.
Oh, there we
Yeah,
go. All right. Here's my first question for you. What did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid?
One that I remember is to be a baseball player.
Oh.
And I played rec baseball for 9 years.
Oh.
And I was terrible. I never really liked baseball that much.
It's really hard.
It's a pretty boring sport. But then sometime around high school, I started thinking about media. And so a couple of years later, I chose just to go for it with radio. And you can't, 20 years old, it's hard to find an audience as a talk radio. Nobody wants to listen to your opinions about anything.
But a lot of 20-year-olds have audiences.
They have an audience, but they don't have much to say to the audience, which is the problem. Yeah. So I was at the rock station for 5 years. And then right at the end of that, I met who would become my wife. And so then I tried to make the jump into talk radio. Sometime in the middle of that, I started a website, a blog. It's called Matt Walsh Blog, very creatively titled. That was where I kind of talked about the issues that actually interested me.
Yeah.
And about 6 months into it, for some reason, took off. The first viral post I remember well, my wife dragged me along with my sister-in-law to go see Les Miserables in theaters. And I just wrote this long blog post complaining about it.
What's your biggest complaint about Les Miserables?
It's going to sound stupid. I didn't know that they'd be singing the entire time. Well, no, I knew they would sing. I didn't know they sang the whole thing.
Yeah, there's the whole, yeah.
It went viral. That was my first experience with a viral post. And then I just kind of started writing about being a parent and the culture, and I was able to actually harness an audience and develop one. And a couple months later, I left radio and I kind of went full time into blogging.
All right, well, let's talk about this. Your films. Well, I mean, first of all, like, have you always wanted to do comedy?
That was the approach that made sense for this subject, for this film, and so we went that direction. With What is a Woman? I think it's a funny movie. There's a lot of comedic elements, but I wouldn't call it a comedy. And in that film, there's certainly, we kind of have the fun and games section of the film in the first half, and then we get into some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not remotely funny.
Yeah.
And that approach worked for that film. And in this one, we knew we wanted to, talk about race, talk about DEI, talk about the anti-racist grifters. So it was also a strategic thing of well, like, what's the best way to approach this and to tell this story?
And actually, you know, for anyone who's watching this who's like a normie, who's not like enmeshed in these culture wars, and who maybe doesn't know who you are, what is the overall critique, I guess? Like, what were you trying to say about race?
There's a group of people that get paid money and they derive power and influence in creating kind of racial division, convincing, like they profit off of guilt and resentment and suspicion. And that's what they want. That's what they want us all to feel and experience. If those people would shut up and get out of the way, I think we wouldn't live in a racial utopia. I think that is not ever going to exist on Earth. And there's a certain element of tribalism that's natural to human beings. But without that, I think it wouldn't be a utopia, but I think things would be okay for the most part. In modern American culture, most people grow up around people of other races. I know that I did. And you notice when somebody is of a different race, but you know, it's just something you notice, and then you move on with your life until you have these grifters who come in and say, oh no, that you see these differences there? That really matters. And here's how you should feel because of those differences. And here's how you should feel about that other person. And that's the irony, of course, that they call themselves anti-racist, but they are very deliberately trying to create racism because they profit off of it. In the film, we go to a biker bar in the South that's got Confederate flags hanging on the walls. And then immediately from there, we go to Louisiana, like poor black neighborhoods in Louisiana, and we talk to the black community there. And we didn't engineer this or give them a script. Everybody's real. It just so happens that those two groups said almost exactly the same things. I mean, almost verbatim. They both said, well, we all believe the same. If you listen to these DEI types and you believe them, you would expect to hear wildly opposed perspectives. And you especially expect that if you go to a biker bar with Confederate flags, you're going to hear nothing but vicious, anti-black racism. And that's not what I heard. Instead, those people said, hey, look, I don't care that much about.
Do you think there's anything to be said to the argument that, well, sure, it's easy to say things that are not race. It's easy to denounce race. It's easy to say, well, we all bleed the same blood. But if you have if you're flying Confederate flags, that may say something about your unconscious or semi-conscious feelings of racism. Like, you think there's anything there?
No, I don't. And I don't think that flying a Confederate flag signals anything about your feelings on race. It doesn't signal racism in my mind. Now, I know that this is what, as much as we hear from like the left about the need for empathy and understanding other people's perspectives, they just make no attempt to actually do that, especially when it's difficult. So I know it's difficult. When it comes to a Confederate flag, for example, it's difficult for a lot of people to understand how anyone could fly a Confederate flag unless they are just terribly racist. But those people do exist. I'm sorry. I met them. If you were to ask, you could go and ask them, why are you flying that flag? They'll tell you, and they're not going to say, oh, because I think black people should still be enslaved. What they will say is, well, because to me, it represents states' rights. It represents autonomy. It represents the right of self-determination. Now, I know for a lot of people in this country, it doesn't mean that to them, but that's what these people mean when they fly it. So for us to just, from the outside, say, no, it's really because you're racist, that's why. Well, I can't read your mind. The only person who is an authority on why you do or say something, there's only one human in the universe who's an authority on that, and that is you. And so if you do or say something, and I ask you why you did it or said it, and you give me an answer, the way I look at it, I have no choice but to just take your word on that. Because it's not like I have some other information that you don't have about your own motives.
Yeah, but some people have more insight into human psychology than others, and I think you and I are both types that fit that description. I mean, we can look at people who call themselves non-binary, for instance, and you might not take that person at their word for it because that category is more of a sort of tribe than it is a.
Well, here's how.
You know what I mean?
You're right. I mean, of course, people can lie about their motives. Of course.
Or just not be aware of their motives. Just not,
That's true. But in the non-binary example, if they tell me why they are doing something or saying something or identifying a certain way, I'll believe their why. Like, whatever they say their motive is, I'll buy that.
Yeah.
Now, the claim you're making about you're also making a claim about reality.
Right.
So if you're saying, oh, I am saying this because I feel a certain way, okay, fine, I'm with you. But but reality is still reality. And so you can't actually be non-binary. That's not a real thing in reality. And so that, that's kind of the distinction.
So when it came to making this movie, I mean, how did you come up with this idea of like, okay, I'm going to pretend to be a DEI advocate or a trainer, or whatever you might call it?
It's a small shift from the first movie, at least at first, because in What is a Woman, I'm going around and asking questions, and I'm remaining basically a blank slate, skeptical throughout the whole thing until the very end. So in this movie, we thought it'd be interesting if we'll start with asking questions, but rather than remaining skeptical, I will believe whatever I'm told, and I'll let them kind of guide me down the rabbit hole. I'll ask questions and I'll accept whatever you tell me, and you tell me where to go next, and we're going to follow that. And in the process, hopefully we'll be able to show the audience what it looks like when you actually take these ideas seriously and when you actually put them into practice. The first person we talked to in the film, Kate Slater, if you watch the movie, you'll see that she gives us like a roadmap for the whole rest of the film. She ends the interview by telling me I should go to a bookstore. I go to a bookstore, I get some books. She tells me if I have a racist uncle, I should confront him. That, no spoilers, but that comes up later in the film. But anyway, so that was the idea. It's just like I'll believe what you tell me. I'll buy what you tell me. We'll put it into practice.
So did the movie actually more or less unfold in the order in which it's presented?
There are some spots where we had to go back and we realized we're missing a piece, or there's a scene that we wanted or something we wanted to try that we didn't get a chance to try. So for the most part, it's set up that way, but there are a few areas where, like for example, early in the film, I go to this support group, like AA style, a bunch of white people sitting around talking about their grief, their white grief, the grief they feel for being white, I guess. And that was actually the last thing we filmed.
Really?
Was that scene, yeah.
Why? I mean, you had so much great stuff with this shtick, I guess, of you being this undercover person. Like, that could have been the movie. So what made you think, okay, well, we really should go back and do this? Because
although the costume, you might look on screen and say, that's not very convincing. Like, it still looks and sounds like you. But when we were making the film, you'll be surprised.
Of course.
Because people are not, people just basically accept what they see in front of them. And
yeah, they do. And okay, so how did you manage this? Because in that segment, you get kicked out, but your camera crew remains. Explain. how'd you swing that?
I can't talk about how the sausage is made completely, but I will say that, first of all, everyone signed waivers. So they all agreed to be on camera.
Yeah.
The main thing we were able to, I don't want to say exploit is the fact that these people live in a bubble, and for them, they just never even imagined that they'd be in a room with someone who fundamentally disagrees with them on everything. Somebody like Robin DiAngelo, who appears in the film. I'm willing to bet that Robin DiAngelo, that scene in the movie was the first time in like 20 years that Robin DiAngelo has sat purposefully in a room with someone who doesn't already agree with her on everything. Now, she didn't know that I didn't agree with her, but so for her, she just lives in this world where, yeah, everyone agrees with me. Nobody would dare challenge the great Robin DiAngelo. And so I think it probably never even occurred to her that she might be walking in a room with people who have a different point of view.
Right.
And so there's that arrogance that we're able to, that works to our advantage. Same thing in What is a Woman? It was the same deal.
But you did have to present yourself when you approached them as, I mean, I think I read that for the What is a Woman thing, you created something called like the gender project or something. So there was a kind of, and I think it's necessary to get what you needed, but there was a misrepresentation of what, I mean, you kind of had to trick these people into talking with you. Did you have any kind of like uneasiness about that?
Misrepresentation it's a strong word. That's a strong word.
Okay.
People use different words. It might be a word someone uses.
What's it? What word would you use?
We formed organizations to make the film, which is a normal thing.
Yeah.
Maybe the organization is called Gender Unity Project. Right. Maybe there are different names, but those are good names.
Right.
Nothing wrong with those names.
Right.
So.
Right. And I guess it is what you're saying, that people just assume that you're.
If we go to Robin DiAngelo or anybody else,
right,
and we say, hey, Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire wants to talk to you.
Right.
The movie will be 2.5 seconds long.
Right. Right.
And if they do come and show up, which they almost certainly won't, they're not going to say what they actually think, because they...
Of course.
You know, we want to get what you really think. What is this thing really about? We want you to do and say the things that are real.
Was it ever uncomfortable just being a character that wasn't you, and going like asking those people in that bar, like, how do you feel heteronormativity affects your blah blah blah?
I get the question a lot of, well, how do you keep a straight face? How did you stop yourself from laughing? And the answer is, it's actually really easy in these environments, because in real life, in real time, when you're doing this, it's extremely uncomfortable. Because despite how it may appear, I am a human being. I'm not totally a sociopath. And being in a room where you're kind of making a fool of yourself, and everybody, you're like intentionally making the environment uncomfortable. Sorry. Yeah, that's pretty tense. In the moment, it doesn't feel like a riotous good time. Just keep in mind the fact that we're making a film. We're trying to tell a story. This is why it's really good. Our director, Justin Folk, on both films is a great director.
Okay, so this movie is going to be in theaters. So that's, I mean, like, did you have resistance to, are there movie theaters that have said they won't show this, or is that a conflict for the future? I mean, how did you get distribution?
I expected that when we tried to put this in theaters, that I thought there was a good chance the theaters would just flat out reject it because of the subject matter, but they didn't. Actually, we ran into more pushback, not because of the subject, but just because it's technically a documentary, and pre-sales went really well, and we're already at double or triple the number we started with.
Talk to me about the distribution of What is a Woman, and how that went down.
That was our exploration of gender ideology and the trans agenda. And the whole movie centers around the question in the title, which is what is a woman? And the fact that the people that are pushing this agenda cannot answer that basic fundamental question. They can't answer that question. They also can't answer any other question that's asked of them, because the whole thing is just a house of cards.
In your understanding, why is there this pervasive inability to, well, I mean, I know why people can't answer the question. You demonstrate that really well. There's no logic to it. But why do you think that we've seen this rise in this ideology in the past 10, 15 years?
Of the gender?
Yeah.
It kind of depends on how far you want to go back, because we look at it as something that just started happening 5, 10 years ago. But even we talk about it in the film that you can trace this back to the middle of the 20th century. We talk about guys like John Money and Alfred Kinsey. You can go back farther than that if you want. You go back another 50 years.
But none of those people, I mean, they may have been exploring things that you sort of end up relating to, I would say, like a kind of decline in morality, perhaps. The illogic, right? I mean, you may have thought that, I mean, you could say that what Kinsey was doing was immoral, but it wasn't illogical. Whereas it seems like 10, 15 years ago, we went from, we had this shift to, it's not enough just to say, I am a man, but I live as a woman, and I would like you to refer to me that way, and it's just how I'm happy. I think that wasn't enough. It turned into, no, trans women are women. And that is where we have this like fundamental nonsensicalness, right?
I think all that comes back to, it's illogical itself, but it's a logical outgrowth of the kind of celebration and deification of the self. I have my own truth. All that matters is what I think and what I feel. If I feel like something is true, then it is. But that's very much the mainstream view now, that we all have our own truth that we determine for ourselves. Even my very own biological identity is up to me to determine. And if me being a man is not a part of my truth, then I'm not a man.
Well, I mean, I guess we've seen a rise in the feeling that one should maximize one's personal happiness. I mean, I don't know if that's a new idea or an old idea or whatever. I feel like this, I don't know, this is my theory, since, of course, you've asked, that...
What is your theory?
My theory is that gay rights organizations won their battles and yet still had a lot of funding. All of these people wanted to keep their jobs. It seemed like, well, we really have to focus on transgender equality, trans rights, because in reality, there's a very small population that actually experiences gender dysphoria. The definition of trans had to be expanded such that you have all of these other categories of people that are not in any way what we used to think about as transsexual or transgender, if you like.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we also find that in the race world. That's something we kind of run into in Am I Racist? That it's a similar sort of thing that the racial civil rights fight ended decades ago. I mean, black people have all the same legal rights in this country that white people do. Arguably have more when you factor in things like affirmative action. By all rights, that fight is over. Like, everyone has equal rights. And it doesn't mean that there are still problems in the black community, obviously, that could be talked about, but it's not a question of rights. And yet you have these activist groups that can't take that answer because that means they have no reason to exist anymore. And as you said, all the funding and everything dries up. So you got to keep, looking for problems.
I also think that yes, you can say, okay, well, on a legal, as far as the laws go, there are equal rights for black people in America. We don't have those on the books. I think a lot of those people would say, yes, but there's still racism, or there are still racial inequalities, and there's still, that this is still a problem. What's so, for me, frustrating about the sort of nouveau, like, anti-racism is that it seems to be approaching that problem from, like, the most destructive, divisive, like, it just seems to be making that worse, where I think so many of us intuitively know that, like, Martin Luther King was right when he said, like, no, we should be judging people as individuals.
Yeah, there's still racism. There's always going to be racism.
We'd like there to be less.
Yeah, we want there as little racism as we can have is what we want, but you're not going to get rid of it. It's still, that's not a question of rights. That's an important point. Like, this is not a fight over legal rights. Can we just start by admitting that fight is over? Everyone has the same legal rights, no matter what their race is. If we can't start by admitting that, then it's already a false premise. But the second point is if you want to have less racism, which is a great goal, the first most important point you have to communicate to someone is that it is possible to be not racist. And the problem is with these anti-racist types, they will tell you that, okay, white people shouldn't be racist, but also you can't not be racist. You're always going to be racist if you're white. There's no world where you can no longer be racist.
And certainly what's the point? Prominent ones say, Robin DiAngelo, that's sort of her whole thing. So
that's the orthodoxy. That's the doctrine that racism is inherent to whiteness. If you say you're not racist, it's all the more evidence that you are.
Yeah.
And so there's no win. Like, there's no way out. You're giving people away. There's no way out of this thing. So why should I even care at that point?
So why do you think it's gained such traction among certain segments of the population anyway? This, what we now call anti-racism.
Well, for the people pushing it, it's pretty simple. It's influence, money, and power for them. For the people getting sucked into it, I think we all experience guilt. I'm a Christian, so I think guilt is a real thing. We commit sins. Sin's a real thing. We're a fallen people, a fallen race. And so you have guilt because of bad things that you've done. But as a Christian, I know my faith gives me a way of understanding the guilt, tells me what I can do with it to be relieved of it, where I can take it. But if you have no faith, then you're still going to feel guilt because you're still a person who does bad things. You don't know how to understand the guilt that you're feeling. You don't know what to do with it. And then these types come along and they say, okay, well, I know why you're really feeling guilt. It's because you're white, and it's because you're carrying around the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and yada yada. And that's why you're feeling that way. So come to us, and we'll take that burden off your shoulders. And then when you come, they let you know that, oh, by the way, we can actually never take the burden off your shoulders because you're always going to be white. If you're not, for the non-white people, it's also natural for humans to feel a certain, sometimes feel resentment, sometimes feel like you're not getting your due, like the world's stacked against you. I mean, those are normal things that people just feel. And then again, the race hustlers come in and they say, oh, well, I'll tell you why you're really feeling that way. It's because of those damned whiteys over there. They've rigged society against you, and come to us, we'll fix it. And then they come, and then it's like, oh, by the way, it can't be fixed.
I think there's probably guilt going on there. But there's, I think liberals are very generally empathetic, or they like to think they are anyway. I don't know how the hell I identify right now. But I've always, certainly growing up, I always identified as a liberal. And it's very hard for liberals when you have someone saying, this is my experience. You don't know what it's like. It's difficult. I mean, it's very hard for liberals to say, well, we don't want to listen to this. This is a waste of time. This is, it's...
Yeah. Liberal or not, I'd say the same of conservatives. I think people in general are generally polite. They like to get along. They don't want confrontation. They don't want to make other people feel bad. That's just normal people are that way, but that can be exploited. And it's a lot of the pronoun stuff. People go along with I'll use the she, her for a man, not because they believe it, but just because it's like, it just feels impolite to say something this person doesn't want to hear. It's good to be that. Like, it's good to be a polite person. It's good to be someone who isn't looking for confrontation, but that can just be exploited and turned against you.
But I often see commentators who are against this gender ideology, for instance, blaming it on some predatory instinct, or calling people who are pushing this ideology or enabling this ideology groomers. I mean, you yourself, in What is a Woman, you address a school board and you call them predators.
You are predators. I can see why you try to stop us from speaking. You know that your ideas are indefensible.
I see people on that school board that remind me of, like, my 60-year-old third grade teacher. And I just don't think she is a child predator.
You might not intend to be. That might not be what you want. But when you're imposing this kind of stuff on a child, it's predatory. I mean, these are kids. They can't defend themselves. They're totally vulnerable to it. Whatever you tell them, they're just going to accept because they're kids. If I met some trans-identified person walking on the street, minding their own business, I'm not going to run up to them and say, you're a predator. Because I don't think that. I don't think you're a predator just because you happen to be. I think you suffer from confusion. But the people that impose this stuff on children, I just have a certain contempt for them. And
I'm not saying that your contempt is not worthy. I mean, that's not what I'm asking here. Do you ever worry that in casting them as predators or groomers, you might alienate people who otherwise could get on board with with your critique?
That's a risk. Yeah, you don't want to go around yelling and screaming all the time, which I don't. I use, on all these issues, I use different ways of talking about them. In this latest film, we're using comedy and entertainment. So we try to use different approaches depending on the audience we're talking to. But I do think it's important to have a certain amount of, like, righteous, moral anger. People need to see that too. And yeah, it might scare some people because it's a little bit aggressive, but if you don't have any of that.
No.
Then people notice that and they say, well, you don't, like, if you actually believe this, if you believe that they're castrating and sterilizing children, then it's like, why aren't you screaming sometimes about that? That should make you really angry. And so if I don't see you yelling and using harsh language ever at all about this, then I don't know if I take your position seriously.
No, that I will give you, and that I understand. But it's what you are yelling. I mean, I want to yell at these people cowards, because I know that so many of these people know this is bullshit. And they're willing to go along because they're scared of looking bigoted.
But I still think predator applies. I'm going to stand
certainly
by it.
to some of these folks. I mean, to people who are profiting off sterilizing children and medicalizing kids, and absolutely.
And if you're subjecting kids to it, especially in a captive audience where they have no choice but to sit and listen to it and be corrupted by it, then I think it's predatory.
Who is your audience, would you say, for Am I Racist?
Hopefully anybody and everybody. That's kind of the reason why we put it in theaters, is that, What is a Woman? We put it on the platform. I mean, let's face it. There's a certain segment of the population, rather large segment, that they're just never going to subscribe to a conservative site. They just aren't going to. And we want to be able to access those people with this film, because I think that there'll certainly be some people that watch it and are offended. There are parts of it that are deliberately provocative, but really there's no reason why.
Which parts do you think are particularly provocative?
I almost don't want to say because I don't want to give spoilers, but there's certain moments towards the end, and for some people the whole thing, like the whole way we're approaching the issue, for some people they're going to find to be offensive to their sensibilities. But in truth, there's no reason why even someone who identifies as politically liberal, they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. They couldn't watch the movie and even enjoy it, and also even agree ultimately with the message of the film. So I'm hoping that we can access this a wide cross-section of the public, and they can come to understand that we're actually on this issue with the race stuff, like we're not actually that far apart.
I believe
so
that.
So it could be a unifying, people will leave the theaters holding hands and singing Kumbaya. That's my vision.
Or do you want people to leave the theater and register Republican?
I very much want Donald Trump to win in November. So if that's the reaction people have, fantastic. But even so, it's not a political movie.
Yeah,
we're not. It's really not. It's about this particular issue. It's not about politics.
I have been traveling the country for Free Press, asking people about like what they would change about America, what they think we need. And a lot of people have said that we need more unity. What do you think of that? Do you share that?
Need more unity?
Yeah.
Unity is great. But unifying around what is the question? The reason we don't have unity is that even the people that want unity, they don't really have an answer to that question, many of them. And the reason we don't have unity in this country is that there's not that central thing that we're all united around. Now, I think our problem in America is that obviously we don't all share the same religion. We never have. We're not all part of the same ethnicity. We never have been, really. But then also, we don't even, we can't agree on the most basic fundamental principles anymore. And we're at the point now where even if I said, okay, do we all agree that only men can have babies, or only women can have babies? Sorry. We couldn't even get agreement on that.
Right. But unity doesn't necessarily mean agreement.
That's true. But it does mean that something is shared.
Yeah.
Right? Unity is that we're sharing something.
Yeah.
And I think the strength of a unity depends on what the thing is that you share. And I think that what we should share, things like strong national traditions really matter. Mm-hmm. We should share that. When we were kids, we shared that. We all, you celebrate July 4th and Columbus Day and Thanksgiving, and that stuff really matters. Those are not just holidays for...
At least two of those are still pretty big.
Yeah, but the sense of pride and the sense that we're connected to something in our history, I think we've lost that. I mean, we still celebrate the holidays. You go out and have the barbecue on July 4th, but is there really a sense of we're tied to something deep within our history, and we're celebrating the birth of this country and our founding fathers? We have pride in that. We revere these men who created this country. I don't think we have that. So we have the barbecue, but we don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving even less so. I mean, everybody still at least gets together with their families and has turkey or whatever, which is great. But the history of that holiday, going all the way back to the Pilgrims, that not only do we not take pride in that anymore, but it's quite the opposite, that for a lot of people, they see it as a source of shame somehow. So that has to be part of what it is to be American. And then also some basic shared values I think we have to have to be like a real country. And that should be, you value family, right? You value faith, like something beyond yourself. But I don't think we have that.
I was hoping that you would say, and I asked it because we have different backgrounds. I mean, you were raised by at least one conservative parent. Was your mother also conservative?
Yeah, they're both.
I was raised by, my dad was until recently an independent. He registered as a Democrat to vote in some primary. He's basically an independent. I remember my dad saying to me, America is unique in that it's a country where no matter what your background, you have the freedom to pursue the life that you want to live. It was very positive, and it was unifying. It was like, yes, we don't share all of these other things that, the other countries have that binds them, but we were formed on this radical idea of freedom to pursue your happiness regardless of those other things. Was that something that you heard or grew up feeling?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. I guess I think that we're both drawn to these topics, like the ideology that's taught to kids and that's propagated in all of the stuff that you create content about, because it threatens that narrative that like America is a country that uniquely gives people the freedom to chart their own course in life, regardless of these other regardless of their background. I mean, isn't that kind of part of why this is so offensive to us, this nouveau anti-racism? Because it is sort of an affront to that. It's saying, no, we're all very different. We should, you should think of each other as different types of people as opposed to sort of...
I think that's part of it. And also, there's a certain kind of helplessness that these anti-racist types are selling. They're selling a helplessness. Like you're not actually able to go out and chart your own course in life. It's not up to you what you do or where you end up.
Yeah, the system is rigged against you.
Right, exactly. So much of it is already written ahead of time for you.
Yeah.
The system is stacked against you. And that's one of the worst things about it, which is why I think, as a white male, I immediately have the villain role in their worldview because I'm a white male, which, I'd rather not be the villain, but I think I'd prefer to be villainized in that way than to get what I would get if I was black, which is, I'm not villainized. Instead, I'm made into a victim. I'm turned into this like helpless little flower who can't do anything for myself. It's like infantilizing. I'd rather be villainized than infantilized, but I prefer if we did neither to anybody and just let them be who they are and live their lives.
Let's go to a lightning round. You ready for a lightning round?
Sure.
Any further
I don't know what it is, but...
Wow. It means it'll go fairly... It means keep these answers pithy.
Okay. Pithy's not my deal, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, I think you're going to nail it. Okay. All right, lightning round. What was your best subject in high school or middle school, lower school, whatever?
Well, when I was in 10th grade, I took a public speaking class.
Oh.
And I felt like I excelled at it pretty well. It's the only subject I ever excelled at in school.
Oh, because my next question was, what's your worst subject in school?
Math. I'm like third grade in math to this day.
Wow. What's something your wife does that drives you crazy?
She's so beautiful and wonderful that it drives me nuts.
Oy vey. We'll have to cut that.
It drives me insane.
One vice you've tried to give up but can't.
I eat essentially like a second dinner almost every night before bed.
Me too. When did you last cry? Not from pain. Doesn't count.
Last cry? 2 hours after my birth was the last time. The honest truth is I can't remember the last time I cried. That's the honest to God truth.
Do you cry at movies or works of art of any type?
No. No.
Interesting. Do you consider yourself a happy person?
Yes, I actually do. I may not give off that vibe all the time, but I'm a happy person.
Did you always?
There was probably a 5-year period of my life from about 20 to 25 before I got married that I was living alone, and I was quite unhappy, in fact. It hasn't been like sunshine and roses all the time since then, but I feel basically happy, and I feel like I have a purpose and meaning in life, and if you have that, then that's the most you can ask for. It's as good as it's going to get.
If you could be any denomination or religion other than Catholic, what would it be?
Amish. I guess if I had to go anywhere else, I'd go Amish.
Have you ever questioned the existence of God?
No. Well, it depends on what you mean.
That was quite a pause for a no.
Well, because if you say no, it makes it sound like, well, you haven't even thought about it.
If you pause for 4 seconds and then say no.
If you say no, it makes it sound like there's no thought that goes into your faith. I'll put it this way. I've considered the arguments from atheists. I've read atheist books. I went through a period especially where I got really interested in watching debates between, like Christopher Hitchens and William Lane Craig. There's a period of time when those debates are happening all the time. As I go into this and I want to actually be as objective as I can and assess the arguments and be willing to consider that I might be wrong, like be as objective as I possibly can.
That sounds like it would count, no?
Yeah, but I've always had a faith in God. I've never not had one.
Is there anything to be said for hedonism?
No. I don't think so.
No.
I don't think it's not going to be a source of actual joy because it's not a source of meaning. It's a source of meaninglessness in life.
Okay. Who's your favorite Republican?
Ron DeSantis. I'm a big Ron DeSantis supporter. I think he's the best elected Republican in the country.
Who's your favorite Democrat?
I guess I have to say like Joe Manchin or something. Whichever one's the farthest to the right is probably him.
It's my last question. If not a very good last question, but here's what it is. Whose career do you really envy?
I can answer that easily. Fishing YouTubers.
Oh.
So there are people, and their whole thing is that they go fishing and they film themselves.
Yeah.
You know, and they build up like a following on YouTube, and this is their life. And like they have millions of subscribers. They go fishing.
Yeah.
They probably make tens of thousands of dollars a month in ad revenue, and all they do is fish.
Yeah.
And if I could have any career, it would be that. I watch these guys, and I'm like, if I could do anything, I want that.
Do you fish?
Yeah.
You realize
that,
like,
it'd be weird for me to say that if I don't fish. I mean, yes,
sure. Yeah, okay, fine. But you realize that you do have like a sizable following. If you just turned your shtick into now I'm going to go, you could even rant about liberals while you're fishing, and then there you go.
I've thought about that many times. I've thrown that out to the team many times that I work with. They're never very enthusiastic about it.
The fishing idea again. Come on, Matt.
Yeah.
We got a show to do. Yeah, I get it. All right. This was great. I hope you feel the same way.
I do. It was a good conversation.
I wonder how we should end this. Kiss?
No, I'll have to pass on that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You've been terrific.